Hola, me llamo Carl Baloney Jr. y soy el vicepresidente y director de defensa de AIDS United. Bienvenido a AIDSWatch. Estamos muy contentos de que se haya unido a nosotros hoy. Hi, my name is Carl Baloney Jr., and I'm the Vice President and Chief Advocacy Officer here at AIDS United. Welcome to AIDSWatch. We are so glad to have you join us today. Escuche atentamente a la información sobre los servicios de traducción. Seleccione su idioma usando el botón de interpretación en forma de globo terráqueo. Si usted está usando su computadora, el botón de interpretación se encuentra ubicado en la parte inferior derecha de su pantalla. Si usted no desea escuchar la narración en inglés de fondo una vez que haya seleccionado su idioma, vaya a la opción Menú y seleccione Silenciar audio original. Si usted está usando un dispositivo móvil, Android o Apple, haga clic en los tres puntos ubicados en los controles de la reunión y seleccione Interpretación del idioma, luego seleccione Español. Si usted no desea escuchar la narración en inglés de fondo, seleccione Silenciar el audio. Gracias. Comenzaremos la presentación en breve. Thank you. We will begin the presentation shortly.
Hello, and welcome to the last session of our Fall AIDSWatch 2021 event. My name is Ronald Johnson, and I serve as chair of the steering committee of the U.S. People Living with HIV Caucus. The focus of this session is voting and racial justice. The discussion will highlight the relationship between voting and the quality of life of all of us who are living with or affected by HIV. We will hear about the current landscape of voting rights and access to voting and some of the immediate issues we should be aware of and in which we should be involved. Elections have consequences. That's become a cliche, but it is no less true. Elections do have consequences, and those consequences affect our lives directly. Who our president and vice president are makes a difference. Who your governor is makes a difference. Who makes up your state legislature or represents you in Congress makes a difference. We have painfully seen that in laws passed and signed recently in Georgia, Texas, and several other states. We see that as national voting rights legislation is stalled. And on a more positive note, we see that in who gets appointed to serve as a director of national AIDS policy. Voting determines the outcome of elections, and elections have consequences for our lives. It's very appropriate that we're having this discussion in the context of AIDSWatch. Voting is very much a form of HIV advocacy. Our panelists, Guillermo Chacon, Tana Pradia, and Chris Walton, and our moderator, Ernest Hopkins, are champions in advocating for the rights of all of us. And equally important, all of you are dedicated and, I bet, passionate about voting, voting rights, and achieving racial, ethnic, and social equality. I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad that all of you are here with our panel and moderator. Let's begin.
Welcome, and thank you for joining us at the final session for this fall's AIDSWatch 2021. My name is Ernest Hopkins, and I'm the Senior Strategist and Advisor at the San Francisco AIDS Foundation and the National Chair of the National Black Gay Men's Advocacy Coalition. And I will be moderating our panel today on voting rights, the importance of civic participation in HIV. We have a great set of panelists today, and they are going to be speaking from their own personal perspectives on the importance of voting in their states, the importance of running for office, the importance of participating in electoral processes like canvassing, et cetera. And we will be discussing the ways in which civic participation and engagement in the political process are critically important to HIV advocacy and the wellness and well-being of people living with HIV. May you live in interesting times is one of those adages that comes to us from the Greeks. And what more interesting time could we live in when literally we are moment to moment watching the political process shape legislation that is as important as any legislation that has been crafted by the Congress since the New Deal. This is it in our lifetimes, between the reconciliation bill and the infrastructure bill, HR 1, Voting Rights Act, and HR 4, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. These are the pieces of legislation that have the potential to shape our democracy for generations to come. And so it's right that we should be having this conversation today. I was on a call just an hour ago with the chair of the House Appropriations Committee, Rosa DeLauro, member from Connecticut, who reminded us that it's not our job to get bogged down in the process or the costs of things. We need to focus on what these investments can do and what they will mean for the people. And that Congress is a body that responds to external pressure. We need to remember that as advocates. We can change the course of history. And so today, we're going to have a conversation on how our votes can do just that. This is going to be an interactive process. Our panelists are going to be making some remarks, and then we're going to have questions from the audience. Please put your questions in the Q&A section, not in the chat section. I will be monitoring the Q&A, and I'll be asking the questions of the panelists as they come in. And with that, I'd like to introduce the panelists. I'd like to start with Tanya Pratia, and she'll introduce herself, and then we'll move from her to Christopher Walton, and then to Guillermo Chacon. Tanya, please start us off.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tana Pratia. I live in Houston, Texas. I am a part of Positive Women's Network, Greater Houston, one of the co-founders, and I am also sit on the board of directors. And happy National Voter Registration Day. Are you registered to vote? Is your community? Those are key questions. We are going to talk about HIV, healthcare, and voting. There is an intersection between healthcare for all, ending the criminalization of Black and Brown folks, secure housing, and ending HIV criminalization, homelessness, when it comes to why we should vote. PWN had a plan for our election-related work, and we have been implementing it since 2018. We are reaching folks that traditionally get out the vote, GLTV campaigns, miss, or let's be honest, ignored. We are reaching our folks, Black and Brown people, trans and gender diverse people, immigrants, people with low incomes, people who are unstably housed, communities that other organizations call hard to reach. They're not hard to reach. They're our people. We reach them every single day, and we're mobilizing our folks to take action. Our election work, all of our work is grounded in our values. We believe that all women, trans, Gender diverse people should have the right to bodily autonomy and reproductive rights. We should have the right to control what does and does not happen to our bodies, our health, and our future. And let's be clear, abortion is healthcare. This means we are voting for universal healthcare, abortion access, gender affirming care, and more than that. No one should take away our rights as women living with HIV. We are healthcare voters, here to mobilize to make real change. For example, you all remember how important Pennsylvania and Colorado were in 2020. Our Colorado chapter worked tirelessly in 2020 to educate and mobilize voters in the Grand Junction and Denver areas. They know firsthand how important elections can be. In 2020, we mobilized to defeat another ban on abortion access. Colorado is already an access oasis for surrounding states. We also mobilized to pass the paid family and medical leave ballot measure, which ensure every Colorado worker from Walmart to IBM can take paid time off to care for their families in the broadest definition possible. Our Pennsylvania chapter mobilized in the Black communities in Philadelphia and beyond to make real change on the local, state, and federal level. And we won. We won on the ballot measures that, one, will help to change Philadelphia's racist criminal legal system. Two, will create a paid family and medical leave program so people can take care of their sick family members. Our chapters also won by reaching Black voters, finding who supports PWN's vision of liberation. Let me say that again, vision of liberation. And making sure they were informed and mobilized to get to the polls. We turned out, let me say that again, we turned out. Texas mobilized in a way that made real change in Houston. We had 24-hour polling locations, drive-through voting, mass mail-in ballots sent to every disabled person, and curbside voting for disabled folks. We worked tooth and nail to protect and expand voting rights. Let me say that again, voting rights. And there has been a lot of blowback. We have seen truly terrible and unconstitutional ban, attacks on trans rights, and more voter suppression bills than I care to count. But we're ready to keep fighting. And let me say that again, keep fighting. 2022, here we come. Now with these new laws coming out across the country, women living with HIV are taking a stand. We are always the one who have to take the stand because it's our communities, our rights, our voice, our bodily autonomy that they keep coming for. We will not allow racism to come between us and our right to vote. We will educate, blast out on social media, and create toolkits for our community on all of these bad voting laws across the country. We will not give into all of these injustices that are being done to our Black and brown communities of color and people living with HIV. If you're in this fight with us, sign up to be a healthcare voter, and I'll drop it in the Q&A box. But in the words of Martin Luther King Jr., our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter the most. Vote, vote, vote.
Amen. Amen. Thank you, Tata. Christopher, the floor is yours. You're muted. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Chris Walton. I am the new Senior Programs Manager for the Senior Programs, Policies, and Organizing Manager for the Black AIDS Institute. Formerly, before I came here, I was the chairman of the Democratic Party in Milwaukee County. And of the things that I've learned, especially growing up and living in a battleground state and being involved in politics, it is a hands-on sport. We have to all be engaged and involved. I come from a state, luckily, where we have, in the last election, we had 86% turnout. But a lot of these states, especially states where we are most needed and our voices most need to be heard, our turnout hasn't been as great. But it's not because of our own doing. It's because there are people literally standing in the halls of power, making it impossible for us to go out and vote, putting up barriers, putting up voter ID pieces of legislation that are holding back many of us from going out to vote. Now, last year was different. Last year, sadly, thanks to the pandemic, a lot of places made it easier for people to go out and vote. They made it easier to just go out in Texas, for example, to do 24-hour voting, to do more mail-in ballots in the states of Wisconsin, and actually get people out to vote in states like Georgia. And we saw what it looks like when people actually come out to vote. We made historic changes up and down the ballot around this country and flipped states that no one thought would be a state that would move. But one of the things that we have to do is continue that progress. We still have a lot of work to do in states like Georgia and Florida and North Carolina and Texas and Wisconsin. We have to continue to make sure that they are drawing lines that are fair for all voters, especially us, people of color. We have to make sure that bills that are being passed in states like Texas and in Georgia that are making it harder to vote, where you can't even give people bottles of water while they're waiting in line. We have to make sure those bills are fought and those pieces of legislation are not allowed to continue to pass. We need to continue to drive up that voter turnout and make sure that we're getting out voters, because in a state like Wisconsin, where only 20,000 people made the difference between the election results, we need to make sure that those 20,000 people come out, and we need to make sure we're registering more and getting more people to come out. And in states like Florida, where they still have the option to do the Medicaid expansion, which is something that highly affects the people of the community, we need to make sure we're getting things like that on the ballot so people can actually talk about that. And we also need to make sure it's very clear that people who are HIV positive, people who are people of color, people of the LGBT community, know that they have just the same amount of right to run for office as everybody else. I had a chance to run for office myself last year, and being an openly gay Black man in the state of Wisconsin and running for office is not exactly a walk in the park, but it was something that has made, just because of my race, because of others who ran before me, we're making it possible for that next person to come and actually win that seat and actually go forward in Wisconsin politics. So one of the things that I want to make sure that we all are very clear about is that you are and you have the right to run. And we want to make sure as many people as possible actually embrace that right and do run. And so for me, that's why I'm here. And I look forward to taking your questions.
Thanks, Chris. Bring it home, Guillermo.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me? Good. I'm very honored to be here. Thank you, AIDSWatch, for inviting me and Guillermo Chacon, and with Latino Commission on AIDS, Hispanic Health Network, but also an advisor of Alianza Americas and a proud board member also, among others, with the New York Immigration Coalition. I like what Ernest mentioned. Elections have consequence, and I think we know that, especially on today's on national registration date, voter registration date, this panel is the timing is perfect. I want to remind all of us that Georgia went to Joe Biden for 12,000 votes, and Wisconsin was lost for 21,000 votes. What I'm trying to say is that each vote count, and how important is to have Harold Phillips right now directing the National AIDS Policy Office at the White House is a direct consequence of who's the current tenant in the White House. I also want to remind all of us that a lot of people put attention on presidential elections. And yes, those are very important. But I want to remind and want to say thank you to Christopher for competing in that election. And as he described, I'm sure was not a walk in the park, but local, county, state elections, especially for the legislative bodies that define healthcare policy, are equally important as having good Congress, women and men representing the United States and the presidential as well. And I want to remind also that we are trying to accelerate ending the epidemic. And who is in Congress, as Ernest always reminds us in every meeting, is who make appropriations. Even though we are on year one after the census, a very difficult and painful census 2020, we know that the next 10 years, both political representation and budget allocations will generated out of the result of census 2020, another important event. Unfortunately, the next one is in 10 years, on 2030. But finally, I want to say that especially for people living with HIV, especially for those impacted, especially for those communities more marginalized, our engagement in the civic democratic process, understanding who is running for which office, and educating and promoting registration is a fundamental activity when we care about our health. We use a theme right now, our health, our future, and we mean it in every single component. But one is fundamental, and is political, civic engagement. And for that, I pose and hopefully will be a set of questions for all of us. Don't forget that also we want to intensify our work to reach zero homophobia, zero transphobia, and zero xenophobia in our communities. Back to you, Ernest. Thank you.
Thank you, Guillermo. And thank you, Tana and Christopher as well. So let's get into some questions. You all know that over 19 states have already enacted or have introduced 31 voting rights laws that are designed to restrict access to the vote in response to the 2020 presidential elections and some of the expansive measures that were put into place to ensure voter access during the quarantine and the pandemic. I listened very closely to Tana's description of many of the efforts that were made in Texas, a state that has recently passed a restrictive law. It sounds like maybe they were afraid of the results, Tana, because they certainly have done everything they could to restrict access. Can we talk about the ways in which you all have experienced or understand the restrictions of access to the vote could impact people living with disabilities, but people living with HIV, with people who are desperately trying to ensure the autonomy of their bodies? Could we have a conversation about the ways in which these restrictions could dramatically impact the health and wellness of people living with HIV, people of color, and women? The floor is open.
Of course, one of the main things here in Texas is this 6-week heartbeat bill. Let's be real. You're trying to take away our rights as women, but also as women living with HIV when it comes to healthcare. Abortion is not about abortion. It's about healthcare, because this is all about healthcare for women. Let's be real. And in order to give women the right to bodily autonomy, but also you're taking away our rights if a woman is raped or in incest. She's not allowed to get an abortion. But at the same time, as a woman, but also as a Black woman living with HIV for 21 years, I will not allow anybody to take my rights away as a woman. And that goes for all women. If you can bear children, that's all of us, no matter what. And we will not stop fighting here in Texas. We will do what we have to do. If that is, making sure that our people know the right steps to take when it comes to mail-in ballots, what you need to do, how those changes are being done, but also giving our people the tools that they need to make healthy choices for themselves at the ballot box. This will not stop Texans from voting. It will make it a little bit more difficult, but united we stand, divided we fall, and we will not fall in Texas.
I love that. I love the optimism.
Yeah.
I'm excited about that. What about in Wisconsin? 20,000 votes is that's a very scary margin to think about when we understand that restrictions are being put into place. Speak a bit about the challenges that even successful states like Wisconsin could face in the future. And then also, Guillermo, if you could just weave into this the complexities of a very diverse Hispanic and Latinx community. There's a lot of diversity in populations when we talk about those communities, and some cannot be assumed to all be on the same page on things. How do you, as an HIV advocate, engage all of the communities and make sure that they're all on the same page, if not on all of these issues, at least on HIV?
Well, so for the state of Wisconsin, well, in regards to the state of Wisconsin, thankfully we have a governor in place currently who is in favor of protecting voting rights. And in fact, he's in favor of protecting voting rights. He's in favor of making sure that people have access to the ballot. He's doing things that have blocked a lot of legislation that has been terrible for the average voter in the state of Wisconsin from coming forward. And he's been supportive of the counties and local officials who are constantly under attack from those who are seeking to continue to push forward the big lie. Our biggest challenge right now in the state of Wisconsin is the fact that our legislature is so heavily gerrymandered. And I know this is a problem that we're going to be facing this year, especially around the nation, but in particular in Wisconsin. Wisconsin has a state House of Representatives, our state assembly, that is 61 seats for Republicans and 39 seats for Democrats. Now, if you know anything about the state of Wisconsin, neither party should have 61 seats. And that is literally all because of gerrymandering. And so we have to get a map in place that will actually be realistic into reality of what the state of Wisconsin should look like, and would actually back and support the measures that actually make the state of Wisconsin more progressive again in issues regarding voting. We have to make sure that we are pushing further. One of the bills that actually came forward this year with the state legislature in Wisconsin is to make it harder just simply to fill out a mail-in ballot. You know, currently the county clerks in the state of Wisconsin have the ability to actually correct ballot mistakes that are simple. Say, for instance, if 2 ballots come in from the same household, but one ballot has the address on there, but the other ballot does not, but they're clearly both from the same household. In Wisconsin, the county clerks can actually correct that ballot and it will still be accepted and admitted. Currently, if the bill had passed the state, well, the bill had passed the state legislature, but the governor vetoed. If he hadn't been there in place to veto that bill, that would have made that illegal. They would have called that vote tampering. Even though, and that's clearly an example of, it's a minor mistake that literally would have cost somebody their freedom and their right to vote as an American. So we have to get more people engaged in the process. You know, they've been trying to cut back early voting in the state of Wisconsin. At what point they actually wanted to ban same-day voter registration in the state of Wisconsin. So we have to continue pushing these fights. And thankfully we have people in place currently in the executive branch in Wisconsin who are standing up for voting rights. But we are always one election away from losing everything. And we have to make it that clear to everybody around the entire country. We are one election from losing everything. And unless we stand up at every single election, from the mayor to the city council, to the governor, the state Supreme Court, all the way to the White House, we are in danger until we are not. And especially people in our communities, we are in danger until we are not. And we have to make sure we're fighting like we are in danger.
Guillermo?
Thank you. Yeah, no, very important, both Dana and Christopher points. And I want to add that what Ernest asked, and I'm sure you know that, you know, a lot of people refer to, you know, to our segment of our community in different ways. You know, I use the term Hispanic Latinx, and we're very diverse. Behind that, you have Mexican Americans, you have Central Americans, South Americans, Caribbeans, you have Black Latinos, Afro Latinos, you have white Latinos, you know, we have all the colors, yellow, brown, you name it. But also, that's the way that also people behave, Chicanos, Chicanas, of course. You need to recognize that we're a galaxy of cultures, traditions, history. I always love to remind you people that when the Europeans came and begin to destroy this country that, you know, originally belonged to the native nations, and they say, we're gonna go and discover the West Coast, you know, we're gonna go and build and bring progress. Look the history. It was already well developed, very sophisticated business activity throughout the West Coast. A lot of roads were made, et cetera, et cetera. And that's the reason history is very important. And I'm making this reference just because the reason why we have this weight, and this is not new, but have been intensified, is based on the results of 2020 elections. They sound the alarm. And also Georgia, you know, sweet Georgia, the South developed. Just think for a minute, if Georgia will not give us to one party a majority, very narrow, but a majority in the Senate, it will be disaster right now. And we owe the South so much, you know, from Georgia all the way deep, and including Texas and Florida as the big brothers and sisters from the South. But I want to remind you also that when we talk about voter registration and Latinos, Latinas, naturalization is very important, meaning anybody, and it's millions of people that are permanent residents that need to become citizens, or immigrants from Haiti, from Africa, motherland Africa, etc., Korea, China, that also we need to support local organizations that are naturalizations drive. Because just to give you an idea, as the 2020 elections, 16.6 million Latinos, Latinas, or Latinx participate in the elections. Was the greatest number, by the way, 30% increase. But also you read in the newspapers that because in Miami-Dade, one county out of 67 in Florida that went for Trump, they broadcast that Latinos were supporting Trump. And yeah, you know, it's like 27% of the national vote went for Trump. But that's not even close how Latinos vote in Florida overall in the state. But I think Christopher and Tana's point is that we need to do this on an ongoing basis. It cannot be just 3 months before an election, and not only one elections. And I always remind people that the challenges that we have is that it's always election, city council elections, you know, mayors, county executives, governors. Coming up, a very important elections in Texas. They're going to be electing next year a governor. We're going to be electing a new governor in Georgia and so on. And then we truly need to motivate and educate our people that it's not only about responding to end the HIV epidemic and any other ID infections or diseases like COVID right now, but also it's what Tana and Christopher was saying about, it's about healthcare and the type of wellness and protections that we need to secure to our diverse communities. I leave it like that. Ernest, back to you.
There's a question in the Q&A about how each of you have successfully had conversations with people who've been discouraged from voting for a variety of reasons. They look at Washington, they look at the media, and they have a sense that it doesn't make a difference who I vote for, nothing's really changing for me, that there's gridlock every place, and that the people at the bottom really aren't getting served, that no one's really addressing the needs of the people who aren't in power. How do you motivate people to actually go out and vote, especially in an environment where the government is doing everything it can do to make it more difficult? What's your message to people who are HIV positive or who are advocates, healthcare advocates, or reproductive right advocates, or LGBTQ advocates, to remind them on why it's so important to vote and to encourage them to vote? What would you say to them?
My first thing is, if you don't like what you're seeing, you don't think things are going right, grab a clipboard and run. If you don't see the change you want to see in our halls of Congress, in the city hall, and in the county board buildings and meetings, run. You can make that difference, and you can be that difference. There is no impediment to running for office. Sadly, the bills that they put in place to hurt people and make them not be able to vote, they don't change it on who can actually run for office. You can run for office and change this. But that's always a few steps later. Of course, you have to get out there and vote, because every vote counts. No matter what anybody tells you, every single vote counts. The reason that Donald Trump didn't win Wisconsin was literally one vote per precinct in the state of Wisconsin. That's literally every vote count. We have elections that are decided by maybe 2 or 3 or 100 votes at a time sometimes. The presidency itself was decided by 537 votes in Florida back in 2000. So, I would always encourage you to vote. But you may not have the candidates that you want to see. Maybe the issues that you care about aren't being talked about. Get engaged. Be involved in it. Make them come and talk to you. During election seasons, the most powerful person in the country is a voter. And if you can get more than one person to show up at a group event, the candidates will come to you. You won't have to chase them down. Also, be willing to donate to people who support the issues that you support. Get out there and vote, and don't just vote in the general election. We need you to vote in November. We also need you to get out there and pick in those primaries. We need you to get out there early. You got to get in the game, but you got to get in the game early so you can determine what the game will look like. And that is the most important way I could say it. Be engaged, be involved. And if you still don't like what's happening, get out there on the field and run.
Tana, what would you say?
I would say this is one thing that I've learned in this political arena, is that you have to find something that people care about, issues that people care about. Like here in Texas, the power grid. Our people almost froze to death. Some of our people died in a winter storm. We have to think about our children dying here in Texas from COVID-19. We have to think about our families not being able to have a job to go to work. We have to think about economic justice, equity, all of that. But you really have to have something that is relatable to Black and Brown communities. People will vote if you give them the tools, the access, everything that they need. They don't have to go look for it. You give it to them. You bring it to their neighborhoods. You bring the conversations, not at the time when it's ready, when you need them to go vote. You got to do this all year long. I don't care if it's 2, 3 years, and be very unapologetic about why you are there. So, no, I hear all the time, oh no, my vote's not gonna count. In order to make a change, we got to be that change we want to see. So if we don't vote, we won't see that change.
Guillermo, in the Hispanic Latinx community, we have a lot of English as second language speakers. Are many of the ballots and educational materials for elections translated across the country? And if not, what are the efforts that are being made to make sure that people can at least be educated in their first language in order to cast their ballots?
Yep. Thank you, Ernest. And thank you for raising that issue. I always remind my fellow activists, organizers, and colleagues and peers that we need to always customize both in English and Spanish our engagement, because we cannot exclude, and in some areas, multiple language, Mixteco, Garifuna, if you're from the Atlantic coast of Honduras, etc. It's a very complex, because communication and language justice is an essential piece. I'm very proud to share with all of you that our team at Latinos in the South program based in North Carolina was one of the core areas, partnership with Tilde, folks that we, an association that promote translation and language justice, we raised that issue, and that we applied that not only to healthcare, but also to civic engagement. But one piece that you ask about, how can we convince people? I always, the answer of a lot of people is, oh, politics is full of corruption. And yes, they're right, and that is, by the way, unfortunately, in both parties, Republicans and Democrats. And we need to remind people that if you see something not right, you need to get involved and make it right. And I think that is an essential. I always remind people, if you don't like what they're cooking, take a class, register, right, or naturalize, and cook, learn how to cook to make it better. And I believe, I love what Tana was saying about, we need to make it very simple about rice and beans, about basic things that people will relate to. How can we spend trillions on dollars to kill people in Afghanistan, but and then we hesitate to invest in our communities, right? Something wrong there. And I remind people, we need to change. A lot of folks, and if you notice in the last 3 election cycles, we're talking about local and regional elections, a lot of people that for years refused not to hear the communities, more people are involved and more people are making accountable anyone in office. And all of us too, because let's face it, if we don't engage in those civic and democratic areas, and I always told people, if you're not involved, you become a menu. Somebody picked for you. And that's not acceptable, especially when we talk about our wellness and and accessing healthcare and improving living conditions and support services, especially housing in our diverse communities. Thank you.
We have a question that is related to just what we're talking about, grassroots activism and getting people engaged. if you think that politics is just for the elite, that the people who make all the decisions are rich and they're controlled by the rich, and you have to have multiple degrees, you have to have gone to college, you have to have gone to graduate school, you have to be rich in order to gain access to power. First of all, is that true? And then second of all, how does a person who doesn't have money or lots of degrees, how do they get involved in the political process? What would be your advice to the folks who are on the Zoom with us today, who don't have a lot of money or don't have lots of degrees, but who are very interested in getting involved in changing the circumstances of their communities? What's your advice?
My advice is you don't need money to make change. You need people power. People power can change and build mountains. You don't need money. You don't need to have those college degrees, that PhD. You need that expertise. I have the expertise and the knowledge to do what I need to do for my community, to bring awareness to this fight and to do everything there is as far as women are concerned and men.
Guillermo, what do you say about that? I would think for a lot of immigrants coming in to the United States, I would say one of the challenges that I continue to see around the issues of power is that many people flee their home countries because of the misuse of power. And so what is the message that you share with folks on how it's used differently in the United States, or how they can engage and make it different?
Yeah, no, I echo what Tana was saying. You know, people's power is unbelievable. The only ingredient is that we need to get organized. And then I say to people, you know, if I say, you know, Tana, and as two of us say Tana, the voice is bigger. And then the power of coming together and think about doing something concrete to improve, you know, their health or their conditions and our community, because I think we need to deliver also a message about that we need to think about yourself, right? That's not to be selfish. Is that then you're okay, you can support somebody else. But if 2 or 3 of us get together and say, all right, let's go and have a meeting with our local council and ask he or she what is her health platform, right? And then that make the difference if each of us that interact with family, friends, loved ones, acquaintance, we become a group of us. And again, you know, if one of us decide to run, as Christopher was saying, or somebody was asking, you know, we need to begin to prepare. And I always told people, you know, the success of everything that we do, half of that is about planning and preparing. And the other half is to have a clear idea where we're gonna go. We need to be our own GPS when we talk about civic engagement, meaning that sometimes we need to recalculate, you know, and move sometimes fast, sometimes slow, but steady, always advancing. Now, the other key component here is working with other communities. I always told people that the Latino Commission on AIDS developed the Latino Religious Leadership Project. We learned from mastermind Deborah Hazelfrau, a very strong Black woman who was the founder of the National Black Leadership Commission on AIDS. She launched a project to engage the faith-based community. We follow her footsteps. What I'm trying to say is we need to learn from other communities, talk to Native folks, talk to Asians, talk to Black folks, and together we can also have even a greater impact. Thank you.
Christopher, you ran for office. I want to check in with you. Is it true that you don't need money, or do you need some money? And if you need some money, how do you get some money if you don't have power? And this is maybe your first time getting involved. You don't have a network of people who can write a lot of checks.
Right.
Talk to us about what kind of money you need and how you would raise it, and give people some advice on how to engage that way.
Absolutely. And first and foremost, if you know anything about me, my last name is Walton, but we're the Waltons that shopped at Walmart, not the Waltons that own Walmart. I didn't come from money. My family is not in politics at all. As a matter of fact, I'm the politician in the family. One of the things that honestly I got involved with in politics as a volunteer, and just going to different meetings, talking to different people, getting to know these different people. And again, my family, we're not rich. My mom is a city bus driver, and my dad was an industrial worker. And so I just very lucky to have parents who actually supported me in going to volunteer on these different endeavors and to be in these different rooms. And that is something that a lot of people are not as lucky to have, but you can always find a friend, a family member, somebody who wants to take that interest in you and push you. In regards to money, you need money to pay for the literature and the yard signs, but it is all about the people. Money doesn't vote, people do. Money sometimes makes it a little bit easier to get to more people and get that message out. And one of the things that you have to do is be willing to reach out to people. I remember when I was fundraising, I didn't think I would be too good at it because, again, my family, my friends are all the same. But $20 here, $5 there, that'll pay for a campaign, especially in the local races. Now, I would not recommend running for president with $10,000, but you can definitely do a lot of damage on the city council race or a state assembly race. You can get out there with a very little amount of money. And I would highly encourage anybody who is interested in running to reach out to local organizations. There are many around the country who just do trainings to teach people how to run for office and what it takes to run for office. So no, do not let the college degrees fool you. Do not let, you can tell we're not that smart, those of us who run. Go out there and have fun. One of the things that I love the most about running for office was I'm out doing the thing that I love doing the most, talking to people and figuring out how we together can change the problems that we're seeing in this community, making sure that everybody's voice is heard. And so, anybody can run for office. It doesn't matter who you are. We are all fully capable of running this country because we've seen people do it and they didn't do it better. So all we have to do is stand up and do it ourselves. And again, I'll say, if you don't like how things are running, you should start running and we can change this country.
Voter ID is one of the issues that I think has been a stumbling block for a lot of people's support for various voting rights issues in the past. It now seems to be mainstream. It's one of these issues that has now moved to a place where even the Democrats seem to be agreeing to support voter ID. Is that still going to be a problem for communities of color and the low income and the elderly, folks who may not have access to their and I should say the elderly and people in rural communities, people who may not have access to their birth certificate, who may not have a social security card, who may not be able to get the prerequisite identification information that you need in order to get a photo ID in a lot of communities. Speak to us about what we have to do in order to make sure that what I believe to be now a mainstream idea does not continue to be a barrier for communities of people to access the vote.
It seems that the argument with voter ID has kind of shifted at this point to final stages. And even in the new bill that has come forward in the Senate that has all 50 Democrats in support of it, voter ID has made it through. And so it seems like this idea has that's basically, I guess its time has come and it's been cooked in at this point due to us constantly having to fight with people on the more conservative end of the political spectrum. I think that, and I know I can speak from Wisconsin's perspective, what we've done in the state of Wisconsin is gone out and tried to make those laws around voter ID as broad as we possibly can. Going out and making sure that, it's not just a driver's license. If you have a birth certificate, that will qualify. If you have a college ID, that will qualify. If you have a bill with your name on it from a utility, that will qualify. Making sure your military ID qualifies. Making sure your passport qualifies. In Wisconsin, when they first put voter ID in, a military ID would count. Gun. What is that? Having the concealed carry permit would count, but a college ID wouldn't count. Making sure we broaden that out so much that everything that could identify you would count. Even in the city of Milwaukee, we give out city ID cards, making sure that if your local municipality is giving out ID cards, that will also qualify so that you can use that to vote. Doing everything we can to make it as easy and accessible. Making sure that once you do have an ID and you have it on file, you can just automatically request an absentee ballot. We just have to make it as broad as possible. People aren't exactly running over themselves to commit voter fraud. We can't get people to go out and vote at the numbers we want them to go. So I don't exactly see them marching to just go and commit a crime about voting. When people start getting 100% turnouts and people are super excited about voting, then I will be like, okay, maybe we need to check and see who's voting. But until we get to that point, I think we need to make it as easy and as possible. There was a state representative down in Georgia, Burt Jones, who said, voting is a privilege. No, voting is not a privilege. Voting is a right. And everybody has the right to exercise that right and be there and be counted and be heard. So in regards to voting ID, I think they need to be as broad as humanly possible. Whatever it takes to make that ID clearly show who you are, that's fine. I come from a time when we were fighting against voter ID, so I don't exactly have a lot to say in favor of it. But these are the situations where we are. But I wrap it around to say this is one of those issues where we need to get more people out voting in primaries so that we get to a situation where we have 50 Democrats or majority in the Senate that is in favor of expanding the vote and not in favor of putting voter ID in place.
Guillermo, you have a comment about that? I was thinking in the context of kind of the communities that I referenced, but another community obviously that we should be thinking of is the trans, feminine, and masculine communities, non-gender conforming communities, people for whom identity cards hold a special challenge in environments where binary is the default, or where in parts of the country where transgender rights are still at risk. What are you thinking?
No. I like Christopher's approach. We need to, if that could be, the bridge, the broader that we can say, local municipal IDs, driver license, anything that will somehow break through, because sometimes it's about give and get, right? Because the point that you just made, New York City, for example, we fought to get a municipal ID, and has been one of the big success, because also allow people identity to be able to open a bank account and so on. I'm talking about especially folks that are undocumented, not necessary that these folks will vote in a federal elections or statewide elections. But I always remind people that you can motivate and support someone that have the right to vote. And I like that what Christopher just mentioned about is a right. And we need to phrase it from that perspective, but also always adding. A good organizer always adds folks. You never subtract and push people away. And some of us sometimes make the mistake that we think that, we're the center of the universe. And I told people, I say, no. We are part, of our community that must always aim to change. But change is not an abstract. It has to begin with each of us, and do our own check-ins, and also jump in the shoes or sandals of somebody else, and say, wait a minute, that's a priority for that person to have a name that will reflect who the individual field is. And I truly believe that when we mix that, and we be very strategic about voting rights, and have to register folks, and from our perspective, to naturalize folks, and advocate and motivate people. Don't forget that if you go to other countries, elections are not as complex as we have it in the US. Somebody were crystal mind to design the way that we vote in this country. Is thousands of elections on a presidential elections, for example. But outside the US are on a Saturday or Sunday, or it's a holiday. And we need to aim to that eventually, because people say to me, Latinos are lazy, they don't vote. I say, well, Latinos and Latinas that I know, so many of them have 3 jobs. And then their management will not allow them to show up 3 hours late. And then we need to, again, humanize and also put things in perspective. But truly, it's about keeping the price on how we empower each of us and all of us to elect people that will be accountable to us. And I truly believe that the more diverse, like for example, the class that is coming, we just had primaries in New York City. The new city council that will take office on January next year will be the most diverse. We have trans, we have, gay, we have, you name it, Black, Latino, Haitian. It's so diverse that's the ideal, but New York City is not the universe. I always tell people we need to think about the Midwest. We need to talk about Texas and so on. And then we will be able to be more mindful about, sometimes we need to support someone running for governor in Texas, because I agree with Christopher, the $5, $10 contribute, but some elections, unfortunately, the way that politics is designed in this country, it's about who have the resources to buy advertising, one of the most expensive things in political campaigns. But we know that many officials have been elected with people's driven campaign, the $5, $30 campaign, and that makes the difference as well. Thank you.
There's a question in the Q&A that's related to what you just said, Guillermo. So the question is about Ted Cruz. I guess is he the junior senator of Texas, or is he your senior senator of Texas now? I can't remember. But they're asking the question of how he was able to run for president, because both of his parents are foreign born and he was born in Canada. And my recollection of this is that his mother met the requirement that even though she was foreign born, she had lived in the United States long enough for him to qualify as a citizen at birth. So he was born in Canada, but he was born of technically a naturalized American woman. And so even though his father didn't qualify, his mother did, and that then automatically conferred citizenship to him, even though he was born out of the country. So to your point, there's complexity in these issues, and especially in border states, that complexity can be used for or against you, depending on who's in power. And who gets to decide who's in power? We do. So we need to keep that in mind. Let me look and see. There's a lot of chatter.
I just want to say that even if we send Ted Cruz back to Canada, I'm sure they will send it back.
They will definitely send it back. They are our allies, but they're not. Everything within reason. I'm sure that they would take exception to that. Any other points that anybody wants to make sure that they make before we are winding down to the end of this? I mean, I think today, former President Barack Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama dedicated the groundbreaking of the new Obama Policy Center and Library in Chicago. And they talked a lot about civic engagement and the importance of the individual in making change. And of course, everybody knows that the president was a community organizer. So people just like the folks who are on this Zoom, who saw things in their community that they wanted to change, got involved in politics, and the rest is history. What are the insights? What are the things that you'd like people to leave the conversation with as they look at the state that maybe they're living in that's about to enact some voting rights law that restricts access to the franchise, that undermines their ability to get to the polls or undermines their ability to cast their vote? What would you say to them as HIV advocates? How should they be engaging?
Who's going to go first?
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, number one is midterms. Sounds like a long time ago, November 22, but that's the very important electoral calendar activity. Number two, how critical is for each of us to elect more governors that are committed with expanding Medicaid and allowing people and the counties and their states themselves to put people first in terms of making sure that they will be adopting health policies that will be relevant for us. And the third thing that I want to add is, because it's still one of the biggest issues and challenges, and I'm so glad that we're together here, is how we truly increase more people to register and understand that elections have consequences. Thank you.
And for me, I would say, how do we as organizations come together to organize and strategize in a way that is beneficial for all of us, for all of our people, no matter race, gender, or creed? Let's be real. If all of the organizations, the nonprofits, and we as Black and Brown communities could come together and not fight with each other and strategize in a way to make real change, we can't be stopped.
To piggyback off of what Tana just said, we're the majority. We're the coming majority. Black people, Latino, Latinx people, women, we are going to be the majority of this nation. And for those who say, it doesn't matter, politics doesn't affect me, that's simply not true. The road you drive on to get to the hospital that you have healthcare insurance in because your state did the Medicaid expansion, that's politics. The fact that you can breathe the air that is clean in your neighborhood, that's politics. The fact that you're driving down a street that may not be riddled with potholes or covered with trash, that's politics. And the fact that you can go and get married and get fired in some states, you get married on Saturday, go on your honeymoon, come back on Monday and get fired in your job just because you're married to the person you love, that's politics. Everything in this world is politics. They always say death and taxes is the only thing that's consistent. Politics is right next door because politics determines whether you die earlier or later, and it determines how much of those taxes you'll be paying. You have to be engaged. The most important thing in a democracy is an engaged voting population. And if we don't show up and make our voices heard, they won't be. And the people who do win, they won't care and they won't listen because we didn't get them there. So we have to get out there and fight. That is, like I said earlier, every election is life or death. Because if you don't show up, you don't get heard. And if you don't get heard, that means your issues are not important to the people who did show up and vote and they did get heard. So if I could impress anything on the people, get out there and vote, especially next year. Next year is when we pick governors, we pick our state legislatures, you pick our U.S. senators, U.S. members of the House of Representatives. Every single seat matters, not just the White House. Every single seat matters, from the city council who determines your trash pickup to the president of the United States who determines a nuclear war. Everything matters, and you are the one they want to hear from.
So that's a great segue to a great question that's in the Q&A. And it is a question framed around social media and the role it has on decision-making and the political process. So I'll take the question as it is, but then also kind of frame it this way. So we see a lot we've seen a lot of conversation about the big lie and the ways in which the 2020 presidential election has essentially divided the country. I won't say in half, but it's divided the country, where some people believe that the current situation is valid and just, and another percentage of folks believe that it was corrupt and wrong, and they pick their media based on what their belief is. All of that has now also translated into the way that people respond to the current pandemic of COVID. You can look at the death rates, you can look at the vaccination rates. Everything seems to be cleaving along the social media that you listen to, the information you get, how accurate it is. So too with politics and the vote. How can we assure that people get accurate, fact-based information, regardless of where they go for their social media? We have to be everywhere. We have to reach everyone, regardless of which channel it's on, regardless of which outlet it is, in order to make sure that they are focusing on what we need for people living with HIV and vulnerable to HIV, people who are at risk for having their reproductive rights taken away, people who are at risk for not being able to work or to live the lives that they choose because of their gender identity or expression. We have to make sure that all that information is put out to people in ways that they can hear it, regardless of where they live or which channel they happen to tune in on. What do we do? Tana said we have to band together as organizations. That's a thing, that makes sense. But do you all have some other concrete ideas on how to do that? The 2022 midterm elections are right around the corner. The fiscal year ends on Thursday. And, come January, all bets are off. You think things are bad now. You haven't seen bad until everybody really gets into election mode. So what do we do as advocates? How do we make ourselves heard and get our messages across to the people of this country?
Go to the people, knock on doors. Everybody does not do social media. Everybody does not do Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, whatever. Going to the people, to the neighborhoods that are most impacted is very crucial. And not starting in January, starting now, door knocking. You can't wait till January and midterms starts. Midterms is around the corner. So now is the time to be door knocking, getting people registered to vote in order to make that change happen. in 2022. So grassroots organizing is going to be very important and very crucial, but also being strategic about doing the work.
I will add, thank you, Tana, I agree with you. I will say regarding the question, twin brother Ernest, is from Puerto Rico to California, from Illinois to Louisiana. We need to, start local, but also keep an eye on key other places where important elections will be taking place. Our media strategy has to be from younger to older and the middle, multi-ethnic media engagement. A lot of folks still like to read their local paper. Don't ignore them, incorporate them. A lot of people are still listening radio, believe me or not.
Yeah.
Don't ignore it. Engage radio. They're dying for content. And I will say, take back what Tana mentioned. We need unity from each segment of our community. Last year, we launched Black AIDS Institute, San Francisco Community Health Center, and the Latino Commission on AIDS. We launched a Stronger Together partnership. And AIDS United was center of that. My baby brother, Jesse Milan, was one of the facilitators of a think tank that we did. And coming together is fundamental. And I love the name AIDS United because we need an issue, but also we need unity to impact and get results. Thank you, everyone.
I've heard this saying many times, loud and wrong can be quiet and right. We have to be louder. We have to be all of the above. We have to go every single place we can get to. We have to be on TV. We have to be on radio. We have to be on billboards. We have to be in the barbershops. We have to be in the churches. We got to be on wherever more than one person is standing. Matter of fact, if there's one person standing there, you need to be standing there too. We need to get everybody out, just like we did last year. We need to go everywhere. There can be no place too big, no place too small where we won't go to get our message out. And we have to be clear, and we have to be concise, and we have to have a message that actually will get across to people. We have a problem sometimes. We end up speaking over people's heads. We got to get right to it. It can't be any equivocation about it. And that is, what is the right message that we can get to get the most people all on board, and that is that's a multi-billion-dollar question of what is the right message. But we have to be willing to go anywhere, anytime, any place, and that is how we get our message across. Now we just need to all together put our heads together and get a right message to get it across.
Are the caucuses, the tri-caucuses, outreaching to us, Guillermo, or are we outreaching to them to get this message of unity together and to make sure that the message is being translated into our communities? Historically, the Latino, Hispanic caucus, the Black caucus, the Asian Pacific Islander caucuses have worked really closely together on especially issues of social justice and racial equality. Voting rights is at the core of that. Are they still strategizing on this issue? Have you been engaged with any information that they are about to push out to the rest of us?
Indeed, we have a unique, I think, caucuses in Congress, and we need to remind them the expectation that we have that they need to work together. I think both Tana and Christopher and I, we crystal clear about one thing. It's gonna be in earnest. You remind all of us, it's gonna be an intense 2022 because don't forget that set the stage for 2024. And people say to me, what are you talking about right now? Presidential elections, they're around the corner, And the bottom line is we need to remind them that we expect each congressional caucus to work together, but also to put in their priorities, on their top 5, 10 priorities, public health. We need a new definition, and we need to be prepared from the local to the federal level on how to respond to the next pandemic that is someplace waiting to hit us back. This COVID, I think, has been a major killer for our community, especially Native, Black, Latinos, Asians, and white non-Hispanics, by the way, over 300,000, 350, I believe. But bottom line is we're gonna reach the 700,000, and if we don't have that as a use, if we don't embrace that reality and reset our priorities, we're in trouble. But again, this is about civic engagement, and all of us, we need to work together. In our case, both, and I say thank you for having simultaneous translation and also the ASL interpreter, because it's about inclusion. We cannot exclude anyone. Thank you.
Fantastic, Guillermo. Thank you very much. Christopher, I have a question I'm going to direct to you from a friend of ours in Chicago, Ramon Gardenhire. He says, people of color, LGBTQ people, exist at the intersection of multiple groups. They've been historically disenfranchised and marginalized in politics. That legacy includes leveraging same-sex marriage and trans rights and wedge issues to turn out socially conservative voters, legislation that traps POC or LGBTQ people in cycles of criminalization and poverty, and systematic efforts towards our voter suppression. How do you suggest that LGBT and people living with and vulnerable to HIV humanize their issues and get other marginalized communities to support policies that help them thrive?
Ooh, that's a good one.
I thought so.
We have to be able to tell our stories. I'm not someone who lives as an experience with HIV, but I know many of my friends who do. I know many of their stories of how they were, some people who were unable to remain living at home when they finally came out. I know stories of people who had to do sex work to make a living and just to have a place to live. We have to be able to tell our stories. Nobody can tell our story better than we can. I highly encourage, I'll encourage anybody, young, not as young, Black, white, gay, straight, Latinx, LGBT, wherever you are, be out there, make your presence known, take up as much space as you can, and get involved. And don't let anyone tell you you can't be involved. There is no requirement. The requirement to be a member of the United States House of Representatives is to be 25 years old and live in the state that you're running from. The requirement to be in the US Senate is to live in the state you're running from and be 30. The requirement for president is 35 and live in the United States. Get out there and go. Don't let anybody tell you what you can or cannot do in the United States of America, because we have rights. And we're used to people telling us, well, I have my right to stop you. Well, your rights end where my rights begin. And you have to get out there and don't let them stop you. Now, in regards to being part of an intersectional part of the many different cultures that I luckily have a chance to represent, I was the first Black gay man to be chair of the Democratic Party in Milwaukee County. And I was the youngest person to ever be chair. And of course, again, that is no easy feat. But I also pushed and did what I was supposed to do to make it easier, not just for myself, but for when the next person comes up, it won't even be a thought process. When I ran for chair, I ended up getting elected unanimously. And when I ran for re-election, I got elected unanimously. But I put in the work and I made it possible for other people to come forward after me who will be able to continue doing the work of making it easier for everybody to have a chance to be in the show. And that's what we have to do. I always tell folks, I don't mind being the Black person in the room. I mind remaining the only Black person in the room. And I have to make sure that everybody who wants to come into this room after I leave is more than welcome to be in here and be a part of this. And it's not just for myself and for Black people and for gay Black people. I want to make sure that the Latinx community is involved. I want to make sure the trans community is involved. I want to make sure that people who are HIV positive are in that room. I want every single person who wants to be in that room to be in that room, because we all have this opportunity and our lived experiences to make this whole nation a better place. So never, under any circumstance, do you stand back and let someone tell you you can't be involved. You make yourself involved, and you knock that door down. And if you can't, there's people out here who'll join you, and we'll push you, and we'll be behind you 100% of the way.
Tana, Christopher, Guillermo, thank you so much for a fantastic conversation. I hope the folks on the Zoom are as inspired as I am by the comments, by the wisdom, by the understanding of the magnitude of what we face. We have a lot of work to do. We're doing it for ourselves, so it's not all altruistic, but we also represent communities of people who count on us. And so I hope everyone on the Zoom understands they have a role to play. It's a critical time in our nation. None of us can stand back and observe. We all have to engage and act. And I hope that you've been as inspired as I have been by these leaders who are providing us with a roadmap on how to move forward. It's been a great AIDS Watch. I really appreciated this conversation. I was already inspired, but now I'm even more inspired. It's been great to engage with all of you. And on behalf of the San Francisco AIDS Foundation, the National Black Gay Men's Advocacy Coalition, and my friends over at AIDS Watch, thank you very much. Good night.
Good evening. I'm Carl Bologna Jr., Vice President and Chief Advocacy Officer with AIDS United. I want to first thank our partners and sponsors, the U.S. People Living with HIV Caucus, the Treatment Access Expansion Project, and our presenting sponsor, Merck, for helping us all bring Fall AIDSWatch to y'all the past 2 days. At this most recent AIDSWatch, y'all have had the opportunity to hear from experts about issues impacting the quality of life of people living with HIV, expanding access to care, civil rights and justice, voting rights and racial justice, and all of these will be key factors in ending the HIV epidemic. In 2018, we launched an ambitious and attainable roadmap to ending the HIV epidemic in the US. And as we enter the 3rd anniversary of that release, it's time for us to reevaluate the tenets of that plan and ensure they are aligned with today's realities. We have had several major successes since the roadmap was released. We fought for and won greater funding in the Ryan White program. We fought for and won more investments in HOPWA, and the Trump administration launched their own Ending the Epidemic plan, which drew heavily on our roadmap. However, we all have tremendous obstacles to success ahead of us. HIV-related programs continue to be underfunded. There are still several states that have yet to expand Medicaid, and syringe service programs across the nation have been forced to close. One of the most detrimental roadblocks to achieving our goal of ending the HIV epidemic is the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. COVID-19 has impacted and continues to impact both our ability as an HIV community to provide on-the-ground services that we know will stop the HIV epidemic. It has also impacted the ability of federal and state governments to marshal the attention and resources necessary to creating policy and political will we need to succeed. Perhaps most of all, COVID has altered the fabric of how we live, love, gather, and advocate, making events like Virtual AIDSWatch bittersweet and all the more necessary. Further, COVID-19 has shown a spotlight on some of the long-standing health disparities, particularly the racial health disparities that we in the HIV community have known about for decades. It has also shown the public health infrastructure in the United States to be insufficient to meeting our needs. We need large investments in the public health infrastructure, and now we have the opportunity and access to the Biden-Harris administration who are seeking input from the community on updates to their own national strategies to end the epidemic. Together, we absolutely have the tools necessary to end the HIV epidemic. We have overcome odds that seemed insurmountable before. Together, we can show the world that an HIV advocate can do. Together, we can end the HIV epidemic. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your evening.